Hi, everyone, and welcome to a very special Talking Insomnia episode. Tom is with us. Welcome.
Hey, Daniel.
So,
Hey.
for anyone who doesn't know Tom here, you were a client of mine quite briefly, actually, within bedtime within the app. But with this said, actually, just to let us know how did you first kind of come across me and my work?
Oh man, YouTube algorithm just took me to you. I don't know what I was typing in. I was probably just typing help, sleep, help. I don't know. And I eventually found your content, and um this was back in December of 2021, right around then, which is, not very long ago from now. If you're watching from the future, this is February probably. Um uh but I had left a job at the midway through 2021, and since sort of at that point, um, I noticed my sleep getting worse and worse as I had no kind of schedule, or less of a schedule, and it sort of all culminated at the end of the year when I got COVID, and that also threw a wrench in it. I was not at home. I was traveling. I was, different. Sleeping situation. But leading up to that point, there had been these nights where I was just miserable and almost like in a state of fear of like why I'm not able to sort of get through this, and sort of psyching myself out of, especially on nights where there was something that I had to do in the morning where I was like, oh, like that, and that would just sort of make things worse. Oh, I'm sorry, I've got a notification here. um Anyway, yeah, and it was December, and I it was just a such a breath of fresh air to because there was, up until that point, it was all sort of safety behaviors that I was going after, like, I gotta do write this down before I go to bed. I gotta, put these specific ear pods in. I gotta, take this amount of melatonin, and it was just, yeah, it was making it worse, being so focused on it, and I didn't sort of see it that way until I found, your channel.
So glad you did, and thanks to the YouTube algorithm here. It does work very nicely often. And so yeah, let's talk about this. And so we of course can talk about your story and how things really, things turned around in a very very nice way, which we'll get to towards the end here. But
Mhm.
so we're in, let's say we're in kind of mid 2021. And was it kind of due to the lockdown? Did you lose your job, or did you just have no? You worked from home, or what happened?
Yeah, so once lockdown kicked in 2020, I was, working from home, and I continued to do that, and then I decided to move from Boston to California, and still continuing working from home. But I had then started working East Coast, East Coast hours on the West Coast, which would be, 6 a.m. to 2 p.m. Local time. So that adjusting to that was a struggle, and that was sort of, you know uh, that led me to realize, okay, for a number of other reasons, I was like, okay, I need to sort of end this chapter of my life, with this job that I'd been working in for some time, and I felt I had been feeling for a while that, um, something else was out there, but I sort of wasn't ready to take that leap of faith. My dad passed in 2019, and that was sort of a big, like, okay, what am I doing? What do I want to be doing? And is this it? And I ultimately sort of realized, no, this was not that. And yeah, so it was I left in 2021 in end of June, and yeah, it's
And
been
sorry
a,
to
a
interrupt, sorry to interrupt you,
tough.
Tom, but uh, we understand that uh, many things led to the decision to, like, oh, this job is maybe not for you. Maybe I'm going to pursue something else. But at that point, there was really no struggle with sleep.
Oh, I would say the beginning of my, looking back, for one thing, I noticed that at various points in my life, no, I would become hyper aware of that sensation of falling asleep, and that I can remember that as far back as childhood. at various points being like, and I think that that is just a form of anxiety, or manifestation. And I was just like, well, and then there becomes this belief that you have to actively do something to do this passive thing that is sleep, which just ultimately, as we'll probably talk about or you've talked about, just doesn't work. But it really picked up, I think, with when I started an antidepressant in 2021. That's when, like, those all the things that are changing with your brain. For me, it made my sleep worse. It didn't make my sleep. It didn't make sleep easier, and that became sort of another. That was sort of a big, oh, something's wrong with my sleep, and I don't know why.
Exactly. Yeah, it became like a focus of like, there's a problem here. We need to do something about it. Something like that
Yeah,
happened.
yeah.
And tell us a little bit about that. Kind of what happened next. For many people, it becomes like they sort of start trying to, I don't know, try supplements and melatonin and things like that. Did you go down sort of that route immediately, or what happened next?
Um, I think I was just trying to stay the course of, let me just see what this medication can do for me. And, fast forwarding a little bit, I weaned off of it and I feel a lot better. And it those sorts of things are something you should discuss, I think, with a psychiatrist, and you know, sort of have a conversation with somebody about it. And not that I just picked it up off the street, but I think a primary care physician is not the same as a psychiatrist with regards to those medications. Anyway, that's all I'll say. But um, I did try to start supplementing with some things, but I felt like my body was just so sensitive that sort of adding things wasn't really great. It took me a little bit, but I was starting to take. Wasn't taking melatonin regularly. There was some other, magnesium. I was trying that, various forms of that. Um, but no, it was mostly that the antidepressant that I was on. And um, yeah, just it was just not a right match. It wasn't a good match, and that's the case sometimes. These sorts of things just aren't the right match.
Absolutely, totally understand. So you started taking the antidepressant. Your sleep became a little bit more choppy, but your thoughts was sort of like, well, we'll see how things go, and it didn't
Yeah.
necessarily ever get better. And you eventually came off of it, but that became kind of the starting point. And at this point, like, just to give us a picture, was it that you were having trouble falling asleep or staying asleep or both, or what were nights like then?
Early on, it was more um, the quality of sleep. It felt like I was sort of coming down like one level into sleep and not really going much further down. And it felt very superficial sleep. It felt very didn't feel very restful.
Exactly.
And though that was not the case, so it's not to say that I didn't have sleep issues after I weaned off of that medication I was on. I if anything, they sort of manifested into a different form, which was just very strong inability to fall asleep, and sort of just the tossing and turning, and just there was just such a physical sensation of anxiety, I think, and sort of especially like in my chest area of like, I just and all the things that you talk of doing, like leaving the room. And I was just like, no, I'm gonna roll around, that'll help. Like it was just sort of, I was wallowing in this feeling. And it's I could use some choice words, but it sucks. uh,
Absolutely. So you didn't. So I get a sense that you didn't really go down sort of like the supplement rabbit hole like many people do. But what were some of the things that you thought that you should do that you maybe
mm.
realized later didn't help?
Well, let me bring it forward to later in the year last year. So that was like towards the end of the year, I really started being like, okay, I want to try like some sleeping pills, over the counter stuff, trying that. But things, and obviously that I knew was just a short term thing, but For me, the struggle with sleep and sort of anxiety, which, health anxiety was something was have navigated since my father passed, um, is just almost an obsession of this is a problem and I need to solve it. And that I think is such a big, like, that you put so much energy. And anybody who's watching, if you haven't watched the talk with is it Sarah Stevens, Sasha Stevens?
Sasha Stevens.
Sasha, oh my god, I watched that last night. And it was I think it was a couple years ago you did it. I mean, she sums it up so eloquently of sort of this engrossing of an issue that wasn't, it was maybe a thing, but the bigger you make it, the bigger the wall you're putting up to sort of get through it. And yeah, that both things of what you both said on that talk is sums it up sort of great. And that's what I would say is less so that, more so that than any sort of practice itself, you know.
No, that was an amazing talk, and I totally agree with everyone. You can just anyone out there, you can just on Google, on YouTube, you can search Sasha Stevens, and it's actually the first hit is our conversation. And very well. So this attempt at like trying to control something we cannot control made things more and more tricky, and you're still feeling unrefreshed, etc. I'm sure. And then you came across this channel, and
Mhm.
what how did you react initially, and what were some things that where did things kind of start to change, or
Yeah.
what happened next?
So I remember one night early on when I had found it, I felt just like a sense of peace sort of come over me when I sort of internalized, some of the things we were saying. And it wasn't like, oh, I'm good now. Bye, Daniel. It was, I had a good night's sleep, I think. And maybe the night after that or after that, it was, back to the same, kind of song and dance. I wasn't sort of out of it yet. Um, and it I at the time I had some sort of, I think what was really tough at the time was sort of some travel obligations that I had to sort of say, okay, like on this day I'm gonna fly to this place. Um, or on this day I gotta go to do this thing in the morning. Those were big, triggers of, oh crap, I need to sleep. And that, I would just sort of ruminate. I would notice sort of thinking about that all day. And I'm gonna go back to Sasha a little bit. Like she went on that vacation and sort of just was sort of forced into like, okay, this is I'm gonna do this. That's kind of what happened to me. I took a trip to Germany, and I the first night I got there, I was jet lagged and but still awake. After a couple of airplane sleep hours, which is a different kind of sleep. Um, and it was just sort of becoming. I don't want to go back to Sasha, but she's just nail on the head. Like when you're just so busy, and you're just when you're busy and you're not thinking about your problem, if you can escape it for a second, you realize, oh, that was me making a big deal about it. And at that same time is when I started using bedtime. And so the content from bedtime was just, I was like, yes, this, like, thank you. And I think that answered your question. God, I ramble.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Things started kind of changing as you were learning, and that kind of education started to sink in. And I
Hmm.
actually just want to share for for our conversation, for anyone tuning in, that
Sure.
I remember like you joined the app, and you sent me like a message, and I remember it was about, I think it was about this trip. You were kind of like, I'm in this situation where overall I'm doing better, but whenever I have an obligation, it's kind of stressful, and I have this kind of what I call like anticipatory insomnia. When there's something going on, that's when I struggle, right?
Yep.
And then I remember replying, a fairly long reply saying like, "I'm so glad you're taking this trip. That comes from a place of courage. You're not backing away from something you want." And I thought generally about insomnia, and then it was kind of like I didn't hear from you. which is usually a good sign, but I didn't hear anything. And then I would say like 2 weeks later, I'm like,
Uh,
yeah, I get a message from you like, "Hi Daniel, you're probably wondering what happened to Tom. Here I
uh,
am." And it was such a nice message. And I don't want to spoil it, but it basically in that message was like so much relief and so much insight that came from some experiences in Germany and around that trip. So take us there.
yeah.
What happened?
Okay, so this is a combination of like that release you mentioned is was a combination of feeling for the first time just a resounding sense of sleep confidence in conjunction with a confidence of I know what I'm sort of doing with my life now. So, I had left my job. I had, done some traveling. I, was otherwise like, I don't know what am I doing, and I sort of reached a point where I was like, okay, I'm gonna do this, that, and this. And I see it sort of down the line. And it was just a combination of those two things. And I think I feel compelled to mention that other piece, that sort of what I'm doing with my life piece, because I think for a lot of people, the sense of anxiety can really come from sort of this urgency almost of like I need to sort of figure out what I'm doing with sort of what I'm doing with my life, um, and maybe that's maybe I'm relating to people that are more my age, or maybe not. Maybe that's a general thing, but for me, that sort of unlocked just a release of of energy, and yeah, I mean, it was just after that first night, um, where I had downloaded bedtime, and I know I was it was like I think it took me like 4 hours to fall asleep, and the every pretty much every night after that on that trip, which was about 2.5 weeks, I was out within 10-15 minutes, and it was there was just something and I'm not saying that it doesn't. I'm not. I'll get to some setbacks, but releasing the control of what I need to think, and that in order to fall asleep, like it was very key, because it is a passive thing, and you can't think your way to the finish line. Sort of in this one, you have to just let go, and maybe that's maybe in a broader life thing, like let the powers that be, whatever, the universe, God, whatever, like just let go, and just what happens happens. And um coming back to your message of this isn't going to kill you guys, like big for my health anxiety, I was like, oh, all right, that's fine. Like I think that was a big sort of maintenance piece of what was keeping me so worked up, was like, oh man, this is gonna make me just die. Like it was, that letting that was I would say that's one more big thing of that release that sort of brought me to that
Wow,
point.
that's amazing. And I want to just highlight something which I think is so important for everyone tuning in here, which is like the idea that we have to have a clear mind or be in a place of peace or think a certain thing in order to fall asleep. That's so common. And seeing that no,
Mhm,
there is no ideal thought or ideal state of mind that needs to be there. It's just such a relief, because then we don't try to have like mind control and control our mind and things like that. So
mhm,
super glad you brought this up. And oh, just for maybe a little clarification, uh,
sure.
so you went to this trip in Germany, without any expectation of sort of finding something that would, you know, lead you to know what you were going to do with a sizable amount of time, right? So can you explain, share a
Yeah,
little bit more about that?
totally. So it's funny. The night before I flew out, I was hanging with some friends, and um, I said to one of them, I said, "Yeah, I think after this trip, I'm gonna have like a better idea of like what I'm sort of doing." And they were like, "You don't have to give yourself that expectation." And I was like, "Oh yeah, I guess I don't." And it's just funny that when I sort of had that sort of insight, it was oh, I think you've said this before, but like, letting go of expectations is a form of self-love. And it was like screw it, man. Like, let's just have a trip. Like, let's just see what happens. And if I come back and forget it, just go. Just who cares about the finish line? And that's probably speaks to maybe the I don't know the way not the way I was raised, but you know more focused on the finish line of what you're doing than the experience, and that ties into like the finish line of I want to have wake up and feel rested. And I didn't mention this, but when I was working, I had this strong feeling that I needed sleep in order to do my job well. And if I didn't get that sleep, then I would, not perform well and potentially, risk getting fired at some point, because I'm just not doing a good job. And that sort of helped maintain like the anxiety things. But anyway, um, I just can't explain, I why it just I got to Germany and I found a master's program that I was thought was really freaking cool and I met family that I had never met before over there and um, I found a language course to take sort of for a month period of time. So that's why I'm going back in a couple of days to spend a month there to basically do German for 5 hours every day to hopefully get the intermediate to a more advanced sort of level. But um, I don't know. I'm just sometimes these sorts of things just happen, and I you know to anyone watching, regardless of your spiritual, your religious beliefs, it has nothing to do with like you need to be subscribed to something. I believe that if you ask the universe, whatever you want to call it, for something. Some people call that prayer. Some people call it manifesting. Whatever. Just hey, you know, help me with some stuff. You might get something back from just and I think that also was a factor for me. Was like what you know sort of yeah. Does that make sense?
Yeah, absolutely. It's I was just about like the thought that was running in my mind as you were just saying this were kind of like you had this sort of openness to like let's see what happens to me. I'm open to kind of to many things and then it was just so serendipitous. I remember again getting that message from you where you said like I found this master program. I'm going to move to Germany and it was just amazing, like everything kind of like it was like yeah, everything's just fell into place so nicely there, so I was just so happy to read that. So happy to read that. And which, by the way, now leads us to, these, I like them speed bumps, setbacks, these tricky things that happen. Tell us more about that.
Yeah. Um, Prefacing that with as I got more into your content, sort of I'm somebody who has exhibited perfectionist tendencies and would get very worked up about like something not sort of going to plan. And I think that was a big thing was when I would expect or not sort of see a bad night's sleep coming and then it happened, I would be miserable and sort of wallow in like, oh, what the heck, man? Like, I don't need this. Um, but sort of those setbacks I that I've experienced recently um, were for me around substance, and I don't mean like sleep medication. I mean like you know alcohol, marijuana, nicotine related sort of substance. Vaping is something that I used to do. I had a you know that was something I quit and recently I was with some friends and I did some of that and I was like what the heck um not a great and it didn't feel great after but you know it's like having a shot of espresso for me it's like it's going to keep you up and the setback was less about like I sort of hit the pillow and I'm like, oh, I'm a little jittery right now. Like I'm a little wired. And that was and I'm maybe going out of my comfort zone to sort of share some of these things, but I think it's important for people to know that, sleep hygiene with respect to like blue light content or caffeine, physical, substances. For some people like myself, it sort of can jolt you up, and maybe it also can trigger sort of an anxiety response. Like, hey, that wasn't a good thing that I did. Like this, this doesn't feel. Why did I do that? And then you're kind of just up, sort of thinking about that. So I'm happy to share about that kind of stuff. I feel like I've come a long way with that, that kind of stuff. But ask me a question so I can elaborate.
Absolutely no. I think actually I want to almost like share a statement and see what you think about it, which is, um, people often ask about things like, let's say nicotine, but that's not a common question. But caffeine is a very common question. Alcohol is a very common question,
Yeah.
and I want to say about let's say caffeine because I think it illustrates the point nicely. Is that can how does that affect your sleep? Well, I think there's no question in my mind that some things literally, like physically, just the substance alone has some impact on our sleep, like caffeine, for example. For some people,
Mhm.
if they have like a big double espresso at 6 p.m., they will be awake longer. There's no question about it, strictly from the caffeine, right?
Yeah.
But that's also not what causes insomnia, because that is, like you said, kind of the
Mhm.
reaction to that. It's like, wait, why am I awake? Oh no, I shouldn't have drinking that coffee. Oh my gosh, what did I do to myself? I'm so, like,
Mhm.
the self-criticism, the self-judging, that is actually the quote unquote real problem, right? And that becomes
Right.
a problem of its own. So it's not so much like the substance can do something, but it's not really what
Yeah.
matters. What matters is kind of our reaction to that, is my thinking. But what do you think
Right.
about
Well, I think it varies depending on sort of the person. I think our brain, we sort of create these pathways of, when this thing happens, my brain responds this way. And for me, I had spent a lot of time, struggling with quitting vaping. And, um, when I would sort of get to a point where, I'd be off it for some amount of time, and then I would, I don't say relapse, but, do it again, it would be that revisiting of, why did I do this? This was stupid. You didn't need that, blah blah blah. And sort of, it had been, it's been, almost a year that I hadn't, done it. And that's why I was like, oh, like, fine, try it. Um, uh, and then I was like surprised. I was like, oh, yeah, no, it's still there. That thought is still there. Of like, and so I could choose to be hard on myself and wallow about that. And last night I didn't have a I didn't fall asleep in the way that I thought. I hit the pillow and I'm like, oh, like I'm I can see where this could go. So I left the room. I That's when I watched your content with Sasha, and then I don't know. I just like, one of the things I loved what you said was like, forget about like the safety behaviors. And I was like, I'm just gonna put on a movie. Like, I'm sitting on my couch and put on a movie. I just slowly was like, and then I was like, okay, let me just go back to bed. And I eventually fell asleep. But um oh god, I just ramble, and then I'm like, I feel like I'm in the middle of like a four-way intersection in the middle of nowhere, like, Daniel.
it? No, but I totally get it, and especially when you're used to doing this episode all the time, it becomes more like a conversation. But then oftentimes when you're like, what am I saying? What did I say? Then we
Oh,
reflect
yeah.
upon what we said ourselves. Then we get into these tricky situations. But I just want to ask you, like, uh, did you are you seeing that sort of that self-criticism after vaping, like, oh, the self-criticism is still there, or is it more like, oh, it's there, but I don't need to entertain that self-criticism so much, like I think I've become kinder to myself? Is it one or the other, or both?
I don't I like, in the last couple of times where um those speed bumps happened, it wasn't so much self-criticism as it was like a physical sensation, like a physical body reaction of like, oh, like I'm a little wired now, and sort of accepting. I think where the big thing is just accepting that that's what it is. That's this is just where I'm at. I think that, and that's something I struggle with was like, I want to not feel this way now. And we have such, we can be so averse to sort of like discomfort or sort of averse to, the not ideal situation that we know people can just get all like, "Rah, rah, 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 rah," like this is just, people work themselves up because they're not pleased with either where they're at because they put themselves there as, and that's just another form of like, um, so yeah, it was, I did let go of sort of the self-criticism, but um, I think where it sort of manifests is maybe a hopefulness is like, hey, there's always tomorrow. Like I'm good. Like I don't, I and for me personally, like having these couple of setbacks with both like you know a vape and with sleep, I'm like, hey, both of these nights of sleep that wasn't as great is pretty tightly correlated with doing this thing. So you know what? I'm just not going to do that thing. It doesn't make me feel good. It's stupid, and go from there. I know I there was a time when I was in Germany, and when in Germany, you have some beer, and um, uh, I had I there was an anxiety trigger with sort of with drinking at the time because when I was on an antidepressant, alcohol was a no-go. Like that would just huge trigger for anxiety. And by the time I went on that first trip, I was off of it, but it was still kind of it wasn't too much time, but I was off of it for a bit, and it was kind of like sort of revisiting that trigger. But now, if I'm with friends, have a couple of beers, I'm I don't have that same sort of like I'm just like, oh, good night. like, um, but it's a balance thing, it's yeah.
Absolutely. And so
We
yeah,
get
so
so people get. I'm sorry, I just want to say people get. I get so worked up. I've gotten so worked up about like just things not going to plan, or like, and maybe that's a life thing too. Is like, there's. I'm gonna just throw out a name, Tara Brock. I don't know if you've read any of her material. She's a great author. She's a teacher, like a spiritual teacher, more on the sort of side of Buddhism. Um, of just like the two books, Radical Compassion and Radical Acceptance. Those I found really great. And she's got a podcast as well. You know, check her out. That
yeah,
on that sense of like just it is what it is.
I think I've heard of her actually. I think my wife has one of her books, and I just want to say that it sounded to me like hearing this that it wasn't so much kind of, there was maybe an element for you of like being less self-critical, but it was even more so of like when you had those physical manifestations that were uncomfortable in the past, you might have been like, I got to control this and make it go away. Now it's more like, no, I don't have to fight against this so much, something like that, right?
Yeah. Yes, 100%, 100%. And this just goes back to one bad night's sleep is not going to ruin your life, or or a week's bad sleep, or years. Like, I mean, you Sasha was saying, 15 years, and look at her now. She's just sleeping the whole time. No, I'm kidding.
Yeah,
um,
exactly. No, I think she said that in the interview. She was like 15 years maybe, but I really for her. Now we're going to Sasha Stevens here on a little side trip, but for her, I think it really became like super enlightening. She wrote her sleep books, which is three of them: The Effortless Sleep Method,
mhm.
The Effortless Sleep Method Companion, and Bedtime Stories for Insomniacs. But then I think it led her like to become really a true spiritual teacher in like other works, other writing other books. So yeah, just mentioning that. Very, very cool. So I guess that my last question, which has become my standard last question here, is if you had a chance to say something to yourself, like when back in December, let's say, what would you tell yourself?
That's a good question. Um, and I could sort of think of that question in not just December, but at other points. But um, I want to just say something that's sort of simple, but it's sort of like this too shall pass, and just let go, just let go. And maybe that's I don't want to. It seems trivial, but there's just like leap and the net will appear. I think that's a thing. And if you maybe there's a faith aspect to that, like just having faith that things will sort of work out. But we are self-fulfilling prophecies. Like if you say that you're out of shape, eventually you're gonna be out of shape. If or you'll sort of manifest that. And I think I got close to turning positive affirmations into a safety behavior of like I need to do these before I fall asleep. But I think there's some good that can come out of them if you just don't get too worked up about I need to like be all I need to think positively 100% of the time. Like it's relax, it's okay. But like give yourself some just self someone who I've worked with in the past said it very eloquently. Is like we can't be too kind to ourselves. Like and sort of figuring out how to be good to you is such a subtle thing, and you don't have to try as hard as you think.
100%. I think that's wonderful. Like you ended on like the note that I think is the most helpful of all. So
Yeah.
I will just say thanks so much for being a guest here, Tom, and I hope you have
Hey,
a really wonderful time again in Germany and everything.
thanks. Come out. We'll go to the Oktoberfest or something.
I might take you up on that. I'm actually planning a trip
Okay.
to Europe in June, so we might see you there.
Okay. Okay.
Okay. Again, thanks so much, and be in touch. All right.
Take care.